wind swept through the empty training field, kicking up dust as Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter knelt beside his partner, Atlas. The German shepherd stood motionless, ears perked, eyes locked on the distant silhouette of a target hidden among the trees. Daniel's voice was steady, controlled. "Seek." Atlas launched forward in an instant. Silent, precise. The crowd of soldiers behind them barely had time to blink before the dog reached his mark, subduing the target in seconds. The men erupted in cheers, but Daniel didn't react. He walked forward with the same discipline he had carried into every war zone, crouching next to Atlas, his hand brushing through the dog's thick fur. Good boy. The best boy. This was who they were. A soldier and his partner. A team. A bond forged in fire, built on trust, sharpened by war. Daniel Carter had never sought glory. He was the son of a Vietnam veteran, a boy who had grown up hearing stories about brotherhood, sacrifice, and duty. By the time he turned 18, there had been no hesitation. He enlisted, and from the very beginning, he wasn't like the others. Where some soldiers hesitated, he charged forward. Where some broke under pressure, he thrived in it. By the time he was 22, he was already leading men through the most dangerous corners of the world. Battle of Al-Fallujah, 2004. His quick thinking saved an entire convoy from an ambush, earning him his first medal for valor. Operation Phantom Fury, 2006. His squad was outnumbered, trapped in an enemy stronghold. Instead of waiting for reinforcements, Daniel led a covert escape, guiding every last one of his men to safety. Rescue Mission, Kandahar Province, 2011. He led the charge in extracting American hostages deep behind enemy lines, a mission no one thought was possible. They started calling him Ironheart. Because no matter how impossible the mission, no matter how dangerous the fight, Daniel Carter never backed down, and that's how he met Atlas. Atlas had been assigned to Daniel's unit after his third tour. A military working dog born trained for combat, Atlas wasn't just a tool, he was a warrior in his own right. His nose could detect explosives buried 6 feet underground. His instincts were sharper than any soldier's. His bite force? Enough to take down a fully armed insurgent in seconds. But what made Atlas truly special wasn't just his training. It was his loyalty. Daniel didn't trust easily. But Atlas had saved his life more times than he could count. Their bond was unbreakable, which made what happened next even more devastating. The sky was pitch black, the air thick with the smell of sweat and gunpowder. Daniel's unit had been sent on a classified mission deep in the mountains of Afghanistan. Intelligence had assured them it was low risk. It was a lie. The first explosion hit before anyone even saw it coming. Daniel barely had time to react before the ground beneath him was gone. An IED buried beneath the dirt. An explosion that ripped through the squad. And then, darkness. When he opened his eyes, there was fire, screaming, gunfire in the distance, and pain. A pain so unbearable he couldn't breathe. He tried to stand, but his leg wasn't there. Blood. So much blood. And then, Atlas. The German shepherd was on top of him, shielding him, snarling at the approaching insurgents. Even injured, even bleeding, Atlas didn't move. He was ready to die, protecting Daniel. They weren't supposed to make it out that night, but Atlas saved him. And now, Daniel owed him everything. War changes people, and when Daniel Carter came home, he was not the same man who had left. The world moved on without him. He saw it in the way people looked away from his prosthetic leg. He heard it in the way strangers whispered when he walked by. He felt it in the way they avoided Atlas, like the dog who had saved lives was nothing more than an inconvenience. The country that once called him a hero now treated him like an afterthought. But he still had Atlas, and Atlas still had him. They adjusted together, learned to navigate a world that saw them as less than whole. And slowly, Daniel built a new routine. Every morning he and Atlas would go on a walk, side by side, a soldier and his partner. And today was no different, except it was, because today, the world was about to remind Daniel Carter just how quickly it could turn its back on its own. Daniel adjusted his prosthetic leg, making sure it was secure before stepping out of his truck. Atlas hopped down beside him, his service vest secured tightly to his body. The restaurant was busy, families and children crowding inside. He was here for one reason, to celebrate his fallen brother's daughter's birthday. Little Lily, the girl who would never know her father, but who Daniel had promised to protect. He spotted her inside, smiling, waving at him. For a moment, the world felt normal. And then, a voice. "Sir, you'll need to leave." Daniel turned. A restaurant manager stood in front of him, arms crossed, a look of thinly veiled annoyance on her face. He frowned. "Excuse me? Your dog is making customers uncomfortable." Atlas stood perfectly still, trained, disciplined. The perfect service animal. Daniel's stomach tightened. "He's a service dog," Daniel said, keeping his voice even. "He has every right to be here." The manager didn't flinch. "That may be, but our other customers have rights too, and they don't feel comfortable eating near a dog." Silence. Daniel could feel every eye in the restaurant on him. "Sir, if you refuse to leave, I'll have to call security." And just like that, the country that once sent him to war was now telling him he didn't belong. The air inside Brentley's diner felt suffocating, not because of the heat, not because of the packed restaurant, but because of the silence. All around him, Daniel Carter could feel the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on him. The conversations had stopped, the laughter had faded, and now all that remained was the moment. A moment that would change everything. "Sir, if you refuse to leave, I'll have to call security." Daniel heard the words, but he still couldn't believe them. Atlas, his perfectly trained, disciplined, life-saving service dog, stood at attention beside him, calm, unwavering. The very symbol of loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. And yet, to the restaurant manager standing in front of him, Atlas wasn't a hero. He was an inconvenience. Not here, not today. Daniel's hand instinctively clenched around Atlas's harness. He had faced down insurgents in the dead of night, survived IED blasts, fought through fire and blood for his country. But somehow, this moment felt worse, because this wasn't war, this was home. And yet, he was still being told he didn't belong. His voice was low, controlled, but it carried across the silent restaurant. "This is a service animal, protected under federal law. He has every legal right to be here." The manager's expression didn't change. "I understand, sir, but customers have complained, and we have a policy. Your policy doesn't override the law." The words came out harsher than he intended, but he didn't care, not today. Then, before the manager could respond, a small voice cut through the silence. "Why are you making Uncle Daniel leave?" Daniel's breath hitched. He turned, and there she was, Lily, standing on her chair, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. "He's a hero," she said, her voice cracking. "My daddy said Uncle Daniel was a hero." Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched her little hands into fists. "Daddy isn't here anymore." Her lip trembled. "But Uncle Daniel is, and he promised to be at my birthday. You can't make him leave." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked away, some whispered to each other. And some finally started to realize what was happening. The manager's composure faltered for the first time. She glanced around as if realizing the weight of the moment. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I'm sorry, but this isn't up for debate. If you refuse to leave, we will have to call security." Daniel closed his eyes for a split second, took a slow, deep breath. "Not here. Not today." He reached down and ran a hand through Atlas's fur. The German shepherd pressed closer, sensing the storm brewing inside his handler. For a brief moment, Daniel considered fighting back, raising his voice, refusing to move. But then, he looked at Lily. She was crying now, clutching the edge of the table, pleading with her mother, with the strangers around her, with anyone who would listen. And in that moment, Daniel Carter made a decision. He wasn't going to give these people the satisfaction of watching him break. His voice was quiet, but it was strong. "Come on, Atlas." Slowly, he turned, and together, they walked out. Atlas moved beside him, a soldier leaving the battlefield. A battlefield that once again had no place for them. Behind him, the silence remained, until a single sound, a child's heartbreaking sob, and then a voice, shaky but filled with anger. "This isn't right." It was all caught on camera. A waitress named Jenna, barely 20 years old, had seen everything, and she had filmed it all. The anger, the humiliation, the way Daniel Carter, a decorated war hero, was forced to leave like an unwanted stray. She uploaded the video to TikTok, and then the internet exploded. "Justice for Daniel" began trending worldwide. Thousands flooded social media with rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. This man fought for his country, and now he's being treated like garbage? America loves its veterans until they come home. A trained service dog wearing a legal vest kicked out of a restaurant? This is a disgrace. But not everyone was on Daniel's side. Some defended the restaurant. Private businesses have the right to refuse service. What if a child was scared of dogs? Do his rights not matter? Not every veteran should be treated like a saint. The debate turned vicious. And in the middle of it all, Daniel Carter, a man who had survived firefights, explosions, and war zones. And yet, it was this moment, this single, humiliating moment, that had finally made him feel like he was truly alone. The next morning, Daniel's phone wouldn't stop ringing. He ignored the unknown numbers, ignored the news outlets. But then, one call came through that he couldn't ignore. An unknown number. But the voice on the other end, one he recognized immediately. "Sergeant Carter," the man said, his tone sharp. "We need to talk. I have information about Brentley's diner, and you're going to want to hear this." Daniel's grip tightened around his phone, because something about the man's voice sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just about a service dog. This wasn't just about one restaurant. Something bigger was happening, and now, Daniel Carter was right in the middle of it. The phone call lasted less than 30 seconds. But that was all it took for Daniel Carter's world to shift again. The voice on the other end was deep, steady, a soldier's voice. "Sergeant Carter, listen carefully. Brentley's diner? That wasn't an accident. This goes deeper than you think." Daniel's fingers tightened around his phone. Atlas, sensing his unease, pressed against his leg, grounding him. "Who is this?" Daniel demanded. A pause. Then, "Someone who owes you a debt. Someone who knows what really happened that night in Kandahar." Daniel's breath caught. Kandahar. The night everything fell apart. The IED, the explosion, the firefight that nearly wiped out his unit. And the reason he lost his leg. Daniel hadn't spoken to anyone from that mission in years. "Meet me at the old train yard," the voice continued. "1 hour. Come alone." Click. The line went dead. 1 hour later, the train yard was abandoned. Nothing but rusting tracks and silent cargo containers stretching into the distance. Daniel stepped out of his truck, Atlas moving at his side. The wind howled through the metal skeletons of forgotten trains. Then a figure stepped out from the shadows. Daniel's muscles coiled instinctively, but then his eyes widened. Because he knew this man. James Rourke, a former intelligence officer, once embedded with Daniel's unit in Afghanistan. The last time Daniel had seen him, James had been dragged onto a Black Hawk helicopter, covered in his own blood, after an ambush that nearly killed them both. "It's been a long time, Carter," James said, his voice rough. "Not long enough," Daniel shot back. "What the hell is this about?" James exhaled, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "It's about Brentley's diner." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're saying a damn restaurant has something to do with me getting kicked out?" James shook his head. "I'm saying that restaurant has something to do with the people who wanted you dead." Silence. Daniel's stomach turned to stone. "Start talking," he growled. And James did. "What if I told you the people behind that restaurant have been covering up their crimes for years?" According to James, Brentley's diner wasn't just some small-town eatery. It was a front, a cover operation for something bigger. "The owner? Charles Brentley?" James scoffed. "He's not just a businessman. He's got deep government connections. Used to have contracts overseas, supplying private security teams." Daniel's chest tightened. "Afghanistan," he murmured. James nodded. "And not just anywhere." "Kandahar, 2011. Daniel stiffened. "That was his deployment. That was his mission. That was the night he lost his damn leg." Atlas let out a low growl, sensing Daniel's rising anger. "You remember the convoy that was supposed to back us up that night?" James said. "Yeah," Daniel muttered. "They never showed." James stared at him. "Because they were never coming." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "That convoy was a Brentley operation," James continued. "They were supposed to be our reinforcements, but instead, they pulled out last minute, left your unit to die." Daniel felt like he couldn't breathe. His mind flashed back to that night, the IED, the gunfire, the screams of dying men, and now, after all these years, the truth was finally coming to light. "You were never supposed to make it out, Carter." That whole mission? It was a setup. Brentley Security Company had been under investigation for years. There were rumors of stolen government contracts, missing weapons shipments, and secret deals with warlords. But nothing had ever stuck. because men like Charles Brentley didn't face consequences. They thought if your unit got wiped out, no one would ever question why the support never came, James said grimly. But you survived, you and Atlas. Daniel's hands curled into fists. And now, James continued, they see you as a problem. This wasn't about a service dog. This wasn't about restaurant policy. This was about silence. They wanted Daniel humiliated. They wanted him pushed aside, forgotten, erased. They wanted him to disappear, just like that mission was supposed to. They think you're too much of a risk, James said, so they're making sure you don't get a voice. Daniel's chest burned with fury. They had taken his leg, they had taken his brothers in arms, and now they were trying to take his dignity, not this time. Then they're going to regret ever messing with me, Daniel said coldly. Daniel stood tall, his mind racing. Atlas, still pressed against his side, looked up at him. Ready, waiting. James nodded as if he knew exactly what was coming. So what's the plan, Sergeant? Daniel's jaw tightened. We take the fight to them. We expose everything. And this time, he looked down at Atlas, a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there since the battlefield. We make damn sure they can't bury the truth. Daniel Carter sat in the front seat of his truck, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Atlas sat beside him, his ears perked, watching his handler closely. The German Shepherd could sense the storm brewing inside Daniel. The barely contained rage, the memories clawing their way to the surface. They left us to die. His mind kept replaying James's words. They thought you weren't supposed to make it out. For years, Daniel had blamed himself. He had relived that night in Kandahar over and over, thinking there was something he could have done differently. But now he knew the truth. They had set him up, and now they were trying to erase him all over again. Not this time. He turned to James, who was leaning against the dashboard, flipping through his phone. Tell me you have something. James looked up, his expression dark. Oh, I have more than something. He slid his phone across the console. Take a look. Daniel glanced down, and then his stomach dropped. It was a list of names he recognized. Men from my unit. Next to each name was a status update. Captain Jonas McAllister died in a training accident 3 years after Kandahar. Sergeant Brian Tate took his own life after struggling with PTSD. Corporal Ray Vaughn went missing in 2016, never found. Daniel's blood ran cold. They're tying up loose ends. James nodded grimly. And you? You're the last one. It wasn't just Brentley's diner. It was bigger than that. Brentley's private security firm had been in Kandahar, Afghanistan in 2011. That much was certain. But what they had done there? That's what someone was willing to kill to keep buried. James pulled up an old classified document on his laptop. The screen flickered, displaying redacted lines of text, whole paragraphs blacked out. But one phrase stood out. Unauthorized withdrawal of forces, Joint Task Force 7, Kandahar Province. Daniel's gut twisted. That's us. James nodded. Your unit was supposed to get reinforcements. You didn't. The question is, who ordered them to stand down? Daniel clenched his jaw. And why is that person still covering their tracks? 10 years later, the only way to take down people like this? Make sure the whole world is watching. Daniel exhaled, forcing himself to think tactically. He and James needed evidence. They needed proof that Brentley wasn't just a crooked businessman, but a war criminal. Where's the weakest link? Daniel asked. James smirked. That's the fun part. He pulled up a surveillance photo. A man in a crisp suit standing outside Brentley's corporate headquarters. Meet Robert Quinn, Brentley's right-hand man. And our way in. Some people talk when they're scared. Others? They need a little push. Quinn wasn't hard to find. According to James, he had a routine. Every Thursday night, he drank at a high-end cigar lounge downtown. Daniel didn't hesitate. He and James were waiting when Quinn stepped outside the bar. The man barely had time to light his cigarette before Daniel grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against the alley wall. Hey, what the hell? Daniel leaned in close. Atlas stood beside him, teeth bared, letting out a low, menacing growl. Quinn froze. You know who I am? Daniel asked, his voice deadly calm. Quinn's eyes darted between Daniel's prosthetic leg and Atlas's sharp fangs. Yeah, you're the veteran from the news. Wrong answer. Daniel shoved him harder against the wall. I'm the guy you and Brentley tried to erase. Quinn swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about, man. Yeah, Daniel smirked. Then why do you look so damn scared? James stepped forward, holding up his phone. We have files, Quinn. Emails, transcripts, a whole lot of dirt on Brentley. So here's what's gonna happen. Daniel's grip tightened. You're gonna start talking, right now. Quinn shook his head, panicked. You don't understand, he whispered. This goes all the way up. People in government, people who don't want their names exposed. Daniel's heart hammered. This is bigger than I thought. This isn't just a corporation. This is a cover-up at the highest levels. Quinn's hands shook as he spoke his next words. If you keep pushing this, you're gonna get yourself killed, Daniel smirked. Then they should have killed me back in Kandahar. The first rule of war? Never underestimate your enemy. Quinn thought he had the upper hand, thought he could scare Daniel off. But what he didn't know, James had been recording everything. And now, they had their confession. Brentley's right-hand man had just admitted to the entire conspiracy. And in a matter of hours, the whole damn world was going to hear it. The next morning, Daniel's recorded conversation hit social media. The reaction was instant. Millions of views in hours. News outlets demanding answers. The government scrambling to control the damage. And in the middle of it all, Brentley. For the first time, the man who thought he was untouchable was on defense. The pressure was mounting. And now, Daniel Carter was coming for him. They tried to silence him. They tried to scare him. Now, he's taking the fight to them. Daniel Carter barely slept that night, not because of the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, not because of the bullet holes in the wall outside his house, but because he knew they weren't done. Whoever was behind Brentley Security, they had just declared war. And Daniel, he wasn't backing down. Atlas lay beside him on the couch, his ears twitching at every sound. The dog's breathing was slow and steady, but Daniel knew he wasn't asleep either. Neither of them could afford to let their guard down. Not anymore. By sunrise, Daniel's phone was blowing up. News anchors dissecting every moment of the attack. Headlines calling for an immediate federal investigation. Veterans across the country rallying behind him. And then, a call from Washington. Sergeant Carter, the voice on the line said. This is Senator Eleanor Hastings. Daniel straightened. She was one of the only politicians he actually respected. I assume you've seen the news, he muttered. I have. And I don't take kindly to someone trying to silence one of our nation's heroes. Her voice was sharp, cutting. We're opening an official inquiry into Brentley Security. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. That's a start, he said. But I need more than an inquiry, Senator. I need justice. She was silent for a moment. Then, we're going after them. But we need your help. The only way to destroy men like Charles Brentley? Drag them into the light. The Justice Department wasn't wasting time. Within 48 hours, subpoenas were issued. Federal agents raided Brentley's corporate offices, seizing hundreds of classified documents. And the biggest bombshell? Bank statements proving Brentley's company had funneled millions of dollars into offshore accounts, some linked to U.S. military contractors. Contracts showing Brentley Security had been paid to provide reinforcements in Afghanistan, but had pulled out at the last second. Evidence that Daniel's unit had been left to die, so Brentley could protect his illegal dealings. The nation was watching, and for the first time, Brentley Security was on the defensive. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Brentley Security wasn't going down without a fight. They hired the best lawyers in the country, claiming that Daniel was a disgruntled veteran trying to tarnish their reputation, lying about the events in Kandahar, a threat to national security for exposing military operations. They called in their political connections, trying to bury the investigation before it could gain traction. And then they went after Daniel. Hard. Daniel was out running drills with Atlas when his phone rang. James's voice was urgent. You need to get to your house, now. Daniel didn't ask questions. He just drove. And when he pulled up to his house, police cars, crime scene tape, and FBI agents waiting for him. Daniel's gut clenched. What the hell is going on? An agent stepped forward. Sergeant Carter, we have a warrant to search your home. Daniel stared at him, his blood turning to ice. On what grounds? The agent held up a file. Anonymous tip, evidence linking you to illegal weapons trafficking. It was a setup. They were framing him. But Brentley had made one mistake. Daniel wasn't just a soldier. He was a man who planned for war. Security cameras. Every corner of his house, wired with motion sensors, high-definition cameras, and military-grade surveillance. Within minutes, James hacked into the live feed, and what he found? A group of masked men breaking into Daniel's home the night before, planting weapons and documents, and leaving just enough evidence to frame him. Daniel handed over the footage directly to the Justice Department, and just like that, the frame job collapsed. The FBI dropped the case, and the media turned even harder against Brentley Security. The case went to trial within a month. It was one of the biggest lawsuits in modern history, a decorated war hero suing a corrupt corporation and the government that protected it. On one side, Daniel Carter, backed by the Justice Department, veterans organizations, and a nation demanding answers. On the other, Brentley Security, throwing millions into legal defense, desperate to bury the case. The trial was broadcast live, drawing millions of viewers. And the most powerful moment? When Daniel took the stand. "I am not here for money. I am not here for revenge. I am here because my brothers died for this country, and the people who sent them to their deaths think they can walk free. Not today." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the judge looked moved, and across the room, Charles Brentley's face had gone pale. Because for the first time in his life, he knew he was losing. The jury deliberated for less than a day, and when they returned, guilty. Brentley Security was ordered to pay billions in damages. Government officials were forced to resign. Criminal charges were filed against multiple executives. And Charles Brentley? Sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The moment the verdict was read, Daniel felt Atlas press against his leg. It was over. It was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him, but Daniel ignored them. Instead, he turned to Lily, the little girl whose father had died protecting him. She looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Did we win?" she asked softly. Daniel knelt down, resting a hand on Atlas's head. "Yeah, kid," he said, "we won. And for the first time in years..." Daniel Carter felt whole again. Daniel Carter became a national hero. A new law was passed to protect veterans and whistleblowers. Atlas retired by his side, never just a service dog, but a brother. And for every soldier who had ever been abandoned, this victory was for them. Because some battles are worth fighting to the very end.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.